Welcome to the podcast on Can Trustworthy AI Help De Risk Adoption of AI? How can we leverage AI in a trustworthy fashion and what does it involve? I had defined 8 essential pillars of trustworthy AI and also a way to operationalize AI governance. The pillars that I have often talked about include security, privacy, transparency, explainability, audit, regulations, accountability, and ethics. In this podcast, let's see how many of these pillars can we use in de-risking adoption of AI. We're talking on an extremely important topic as we approach elections, and that is on disinformation and generative AI. Really happy and honored to welcome my guest, Ksenia Iliuk, who is going to help us understand what is the impact of generative AI in disinformation and what we can do in order to protect ourselves from it. Welcome, Krenia.
Thank you
How
so
are you?
much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy that I have a chance to talk about disinformation and the new challenges within the face of generative AI, because that's basically what we do at LetsData. We help companies and governments to protect themselves from disinformation. We use, in this sense, AI for good, because we use AI for actually identifying these pieces of disinformation and understanding how it spreads and giving enough time for our clients to act proactively and save themselves from it. But of course, malign actors are using also generative AI to get much better at disinformation spread.
That is really amazing, and I'm really interested in finding out some more information. Let's start talking about what is disinformation. How do you define disinformation?
So disinformation itself, in its definition, it's a false, misleading, or manipulative information, but it has two significant features. It has to be regular on a regular basis, and it has to have a malign intent behind it. Because if, like, a journalist, for instance, made a mistake while writing an article, it's not a disinformation. It's more of a human factor. Why one time thing happens to every one of us. But as soon as there is a malign information in it, and the actor behind it, or a group of actors that are systematically spreading it to hurt a person, a company, or the whole country, this is what we call disinformation. However, modern disinformation even has so many different variations and tools in it. So I kind of like even to call it malign information influence, because it has much of a broader sense to describe all of that issues that we face while trying to protect ourselves from the new emerging tactics of the malign actors.
Okay, thank you. So, obviously, this is highly consequential for business as well as society and government at large. One of the things that you talk about is disinformation as a service. That sounds even more impactful. Wanted to get a little bit of insight into what is that? What is disinformation as a
That's
service?
actually, we were at least used to mostly that disinformation and propaganda and all of these things is like something that is being done directly by some authoritarian, totalitarian governments. However, what we see more and more, that unfortunately not only, and that there is the whole market, the dark market emerging it, of multiple entities, even private companies, that you could hire to do the disinformation campaign, whether it's a meddling into elections of other country, or destroying your company, or targeting specifically a person. And it's actually a very scary thing, because those representative of this so-called business are not even hiding it, and you could find some of their websites are pretty even public, are not even on the dark web. and they boast about how they use this information to destabilize society and offer their services freely. So this is something that has been quite a new development when the whole market we see emerging, and not just this general understanding that, oh, there is propaganda, disinformation, and it's bad, and only governments have to cope with it.
Yeah, that is significant because we have seen, propaganda for that has existed since even before technology came onto the scene. But with generative AI, the ability to create very realistic campaigns using for propaganda, that whole threat just gets intensified. Can you let's talk a little bit about generative AI and how is it influencing the role and the impact and the scale of disinformation?
It's indeed like having, especially this market emerging on one side of those who are ready to offer their services to produce the disinformation, like produce, basically orchestrate the whole disinformation campaign. And for them, before the generative AI in general, they were usually operating with these things like bots, right? Like flooding social media with a typical content in the comments. They also had trolls that are more of a human beings that can think, can write something more creative, can provoke people. They've also, of course, had multiple resources like multiple social media pages or web pages that pretended to be media. There are multiple techniques to it. But for all of that, they needed, even though it was already quite cheap for them to produce a lot of things, they've still needed a lot of human effort. They need those people who are writing these tags, who are like coming up with a funky titles and some of the craziest fake stories we've heard. So they still needed people for that. So now imagine like all of these bots that we used to identify them pretty easily in a sense, especially because their behavior is very repetitive, not human like. The comments itself are often like of a bad quality, with lots of grammar mistakes and stuff. Imagine now them integrating generative AI. They could basically save so much people labor, like basically lots of human labor, and just replace it with generative AI. And now you would have in the comments a very, very fast and able to produce tons of different catchy content to spread this disinformation. So of course we have that. And second, not just the speed and the quality of that is changing, but also changing the personalization of that, in a sense that with a generative AI, especially when it comes to things like deep fakes or synthetic content. Now, for instance, we are talking right now, we are having a podcast, and it would be pretty easy for the malign actors to take our voices from here, take it from some other sources that are available online, and afterwards just create whatever they want. And it could be used not only for the public use, for like posting on social media, but it can also be created for increasing cyber risk. Like, for instance, imagining someone using your voice, calling your colleague, where the colleague picks up and hears your voice saying, like, oh, sorry, I forgot here my password for my laptop. Can you help me with this? And we know how human factor works. Unfortunately, we still tend to believe in that because it's very hard to not believe your own ears or your own eyes, right? So, with all of that, we have
Right.
more and more rising threats coming from generative AI and disinformation.
Yeah, that is really interesting because I've done multiple deep dives into deepfake audio and use of it as in existing authentication models for companies. So there's really a lot of awareness and readiness in terms of redesigning, how these companies are using authentication, for example, and voice-based authentication. That is very important to consider in terms of re-architecting design, etc. So, but we'll talk about that if we have time in the end. Let's talk a little bit about deepfakes and synthetic media. So we talked about the role of deepfakes, and we talked about creating content, right, and other synthetic media for disinformation. Can organizations identify and combat this? What's your thought on that?
The problem is, like, very honestly, even though there is, of course, this huge issue, is that dealing with this kind of content is becoming much harder. Because again, imagine explaining as a person, especially the one who has no clue how technology works, that what they just seen with their eyes is not true. It's something very hard, right,
Mm,
to basically even acknowledge the fact that we cannot longer trust ourselves, right? We cannot trust our own senses. So of course there is this side on one hand, but then on the other side, this is the big question, because the good sophisticated disinformation campaigns, they are very very good in a sense, like they're reaching their audience, they're reaching their objectives very often, and not even using generative AI itself, like the synthetic media. So and what we are saying is that once it's out there, once it's reaching the audience,
mhm.
it's very hard to mitigate it. So even if you're able to find the video or find the picture and say to everyone that, oh, this is a synthetic piece, this is a deep fake, this was generated by AI, this would this doesn't matter actually, because there are so many people that have already seen it. And it's a matter of, like, you are always then chasing the one who already spread it, trying to disprove it. So you're always already in a position of, like, trying to prove someone wrong or something, that it's not like that, which is a very bad position from the standpoint of, like, communication in this sense. So that's why, for instance, we are focusing not on the fact of, like, differentiating is this a truthful piece or not, but on the fact, like, where it's appearing. If it's appearing somewhere, like if we see that it's appearing in two places at the same time, we are looking very closely if it's an organic appearance or not. Are there those who want this
Okay.
piece to spread? Because again, once it's out there and it's reaching its audience, it's very very hard to do something about it. So our goal, for instance, is just focus on this identification very quickly, so that you have enough time before it gets to the audience to, for instance, even warn the audience. We had the cases with our clients when it was identified very very early on that there is a deepfake coming, and they've done a very good preparation for their audience. They warned everyone that we have an information that this kind of a threat is going to happen, because they had an explanation why, and also an explanation what is a deep fake itself, like how does it look like, how they can understand for themselves that this is a deep fake. And once the deep fake was out, because it was out eventually, it was like just a laughing stock for that audience, because first the deep fake was very bad,
Wow.
but second they already knew it's coming. They knew what to be prepared for, so they took it more of a joke. But imagine there would be no this step of warning your employees, for instance, that there's going to be the deepfake of their CEO saying that, like, okay, we are going to be bankrupt in 10 days. So this is, I think, it's very very important to be able to understand if this is a kind of threat coming, who is it coming from, and what's the potential velocity and damage for it.
That's really important and very amazing, because we are talking about taking proactive measures as opposed to reactive, because the reactive in this case might be so widespread. The effects may be so widespread that you will not be able to take reactive measures, is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
moreover, sometimes we've seen
um
people even doing worse, because they are trying to basically debunk the story, for instance, and they are bringing the fake story to those who have never seen even the fake story itself, but they are bringing, like, the debunk, saying, like, okay, this is not true. Let us explain you why this is not true. And this is also like a this again the question of we have to very clearly understand where is it spreading, what's the potential for it to spread, because again lots of disinformation is not reaching its audience. It's dying in the like weird Facebook page with 10 subscribers or so. So it's very important also to understand, is it actually spreading, is it catching on, is it successful, not to hurt it and not to bring it to the audience that would have never seen that piece of information in their life, but they read the debunk and they read why it's not true, and they maybe even start believing the fake itself because they have some of their own beliefs that align with that fake information more than with the truth and explanation why it's not true.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Last but not least, we talked about the trustworthy AI pillars. Let's talk about one of them, which is ethics and ethical AI development. So, in terms of the preparedness, right, the tech industry, the governments, right, how can there be a meaningful collaborative way to ensure that ethical deployment and development of AI is leveraged for preventing disinformation
I
campaigns?
think there are different aspects of ethical AI. You've mentioned a lot of pillars at the beginning, for instance, privacy. But when it comes to disinformation specifically, I think as of now, this is the perspective that is lacking in this discussion on ethical AI and how it could be used. Because, for instance, when we talk about generative AI and specifically about large language models, you could basically corrupt the model on so many different levels. For instance, like on the data itself, if the data is being what kind of data we use to train the model, right? We've seen already situations like there is a Ernie that is a Chinese Chinese AI model, like a Chinese large language model, and it was trained. It has to be compliant with the Chinese Communist Party, so it was trained primarily on the media websites and general websites that spread only information that
Hmm.
is compliant with Chinese Communist Party. So when we ask Ernie, for example, what's happening right now in Ukraine, the Ernie said to us that Russia invaded Ukraine and that Ukraine is the aggressor while Russia is suffering from the violence, while it was completely the other way around in reality. So we already see, but
Wow.
and when we ask the Ernie, okay, where did you get this information from, right? Show us the list of the sources. It proudly showed us the list of the sources because it was trained solely on the data that has only this kind of completely fake parallel universe in mind. And of course, disinformation actors understand it, so they will try to flood information space with even more fake information so that others that are training large language models are just taking this tone of information. So it could be corrupted at the very beginning when it comes to data. It could be corrupted later when we are doing some prompting and correcting, because
Hmm.
who like do we actually have the people that specialize in it and understand that these are the narratives that are malign disinformation narratives, or not? Usually not the case, right?
Right.
We usually have some average ethics that we could get from those people that are doing that. And then, of course, there is a third part with the large language models that they can go and specifically, I've mentioned at the beginning that now they don't need that many of bot networks, right? And so many people that are doing this troll comments thing because they could use generative AI. But now they could take all of these people and start sending them to the chat GPT or other chats, uh, constantly correcting the answers and saying like that's not right, that's not right, that's not the right answer. So this is a huge thing, and I don't think we have discussed it like right now when we talk about ethical AI a lot. I do think it's very important, very at the beginning of what we can do is to acknowledge it, to acknowledge that there is such kind of a risk, It's a huge risk. It's a huge concern, ethical concern for democratic states in general. And then to think about how we could mitigate it. And here we would need a lot of involvement, a lot of synergy between the state, corporate actors, the civil society, media, because disinformation does not reside within only one field or one space. It's very, very like it works always in a synergy. So that's why we also need this multifaceted synergy to be able to address these new challenges around the very new phenomena of generative AI in general.
Wow, thank you. That is amazing insight. Well, I think there are a couple of things that I just want to kind of wrap up with on based on what you just said, which is there are two very big threats that we are not thinking about as we are connecting these large language models to more and more recent developments or recent state, as in connecting them to the internet, for example. One query to ChatGPT, for example, recently, revealed that it said it was up to date as to September of this year. So the only way these large language models can be recent in terms of their corpus of knowledge is if they are either going to real time information or they are training as we speak, which is extremely problematic. And to your point earlier also, which is not only can you do prompt injection, not only can you do, taint the data that is being fed into them, it's also possible to taint the sources that go into these models to train these models, such as from indirect prompt injections. So that's just one part of the issues when it comes to cybersecurity or security of the data. The other, as you talked about, which is really an eye opener, is feeding it information as in propaganda already, as in the model that you mentioned for China, right, where it's being fed information that is in a parallel universe, right? It's saying Ukraine invaded Russia instead of what the rest of the world knows as facts, right? So if you are getting that information when you query these models, it is changing your perception of reality in such a significant way that there is no way of really separating out fact from reality anymore, depending on who you are, where you are. Kenya, this has been extremely an eye opener and a really good conversation. I would love to conclude with your some of the solutions you have. Right, what is your company doing and how you are addressing this disinformation aspect, especially so that it can be a part of a proactive approach to disinformation. If you want to share that, please feel free to do that. If not, happy to put that in the show notes as
Oh,
well.
sure. I'll be happy to share. I think one primary thing that we are focusing on at LetsData is actually being able to, because we worked in different environments, we've seen disinformation on different levels attacking different stakeholders, from a local civil society organization to the whole nation or to the whole state. So we have a very deep understanding of how these malign information campaigns work, and that's basically what we want to reflect in our product at LexData. The product is built in a way to be able to catch these signals of malign information campaigns, even though they are very, very different and very diverse, but to catch those signals as early as possible, to be able to understand how it's spreading. Is it actually spreading? Like, what's the real velocity of that? And then as there's a company, a group of companies starting to act on this insight in there, be able to track in the real time the impact of their actions compared to the hostile actors. So this is something we are focusing on right now heavily. We operate in different contexts. We've right now working in like 50 countries, analyzing information spaces of over 50 countries. And of course, disinformation in its way, it's very different from country to country, from context to context. But if you know how to look deep inside, you see the core of it, and the core and the patterns are very repetitive. So that's basically what we want to see. We want to gut those patterns very early to show them to our clients so that they could understand how to mitigate it. And they have multiple tools, right? You have multiple tools on your hands, how you could approach this kind of questions, how you could solve them. But also, just to conclude all of this, our conversation, to say is one of the missions of LetsData is actually to raise this awareness about the threats coming from disinformation, and that it's not a PR issue, it's not a communication issue, it is a huge security threat, and it's not just a mean comments online. So this is what we are trying to show, and to show it as early as possible so that you could have enough time for the proactive measures in place.
That's excellent. Thank you. So, as we know, that we're coming to an end, so let's conclude with that. But as we know, what we are focused on this podcast in is on trustworthy AI, how to de-risk business adoption, and talk about not only the problem but how to find solutions and to take these solutions and weave it into a overall governance and a risk management strategy. So very excited about working with you and talking about how it can be a part of a overall solution for a company or a society or a government. So thank you.
Thank you very much.